This presentation has been designed to give some quick and easy ideas for enjoying picture books with young children and being able to have a discussion afterwards about the fantastic techniques that an illustrator has used. So what becomes really enjoyable is that once students have really understood these techniques, they then are able to use these techniques in their own artwork. So it's a beautiful thing to behold. So this presentation will cover some common illustrators techniques that I've noticed in picture books, 2 ways that you might introduce these to students, and then 2 typical lesson formats that can be quite useful. I also just want to mention that because the focus of this session is for children up to 8 years of age, that Jodie Dyson is a fantastic teacher who has made a series of videos to introduce visual literacy to stage 3 students. So and in fact even these would be useful even for stage 4. So I just recommend these to any people who are teaching older students. So while this session, it focuses on visual literacy, I have made a number of resources that you can access later, which look at the ways in which authors make beautiful picture books. And basically these resources look at tasks that you can do, reading and writing tasks and creative tasks that you can do arising from what the author has created. So let's think about a few simple visual literacy techniques that you might want to point out to your students. And this just comes from a sheet that I put together after a term of doing visual literacy with students in year 1 and 2. So I noticed that there'd been a lot of movement lines in the picture books that we'd been reading together. I noticed that illustrators use a lot of frames, circle frames, rectangle frames. They even have their characters jumping out of the frame, which is great fun. And they also use silhouettes. So we also noticed that illustrators can be fond of using cross sections, that they might use low angle or high angle shots to create a feeling of power or to give us an overview. We certainly discussed the fact that over-the-shoulder shots take us behind main characters, and so we can get excited about what's going to happen next. And we talked about what was in the foreground of a picture, what was in the middle, and what was in the back. So that was a series of lessons, and those were the things that came up at first. And I do need to mention that we really did enjoy double page spreads as well. So when we dug a little bit deeper, we got into vectors and looking at those really interesting reading paths that our eyes take if an illustrator has that intention. So we weren't just hunting for vectors willy-nilly. We were definitely looking for reading paths that our eyes followed. And we were also interested in the invisible lines that happen, the vectors that happen when 2 characters are gazing at each other. So I've actually got one here where Molly is actually staring at the dog and vice versa. And the vectors really create a strong connection between the characters. So this is a lot of fun, this one to talk about once you're a little bit deeper in, because you can discuss with the students just how often there's an over-the-shoulder shot just before a character opens a door. In this particular example here, we also talked about the fact that the boy is salient in this picture. He really stands out, and it's because his coat is red. But sometimes people are salient because they are huge on a page or central. And of course, many pictures don't have anything salient because the pictures are really cluttered. So don't go there with salient unless there's something that really jumps out. Anyway, the fun thing is that when you've had on one page an OTS of a child or adult about to to go through a doorway, sometimes the very next picture is actually a point of view switch. And it's actually, we have become, just for a second, we have become the main character, staring at what lay beyond the door. And when we become the main character for a second, that's actually called a point of view shot. And of course, a point of view shot is actually a type of first person point of view. So whereas obviously an OTS shot is a third person point of view shot, because we're saying he or she or they. And then another bit of fun when you dig a bit deeper with visual literacy is to consider intertextuality, which is where the illustrator drops in characters from other stories or from real life, but definitely to create a kind of a feeling. And so in this instance here, we see Hansel and Gretel have been dropped in to create a real feeling of menace as our main character is walking through the forest. So in case you're feeling the need to have a bit of a refresher about some of these beautiful visual literacy techniques, the resources that you can gather today definitely include a PowerPoint by Donna Lowe. Actually, I've done an extract from that PowerPoint because it's really quite lengthy, but I've collected the most common visual literacy techniques that people like to explore. And I'd like to mention that today I haven't particularly talked about modality in pictures, because that's just not what we've been teaching recently. Today you've just got a collection of the stuff I've really been teaching. So a modality, of course, is when an image is really color saturated, if it's high modality, and if it's low modality, of course, it just looks really sort of lightly sketched. I haven't talked today about splashes of color or the impact of lighting. I haven't talked about visual stereotypes, and I haven't really done anything about demands, which is when a character stares straight at us front on. Their eyes are not going to either side. And I haven't really done much of a talk about reading paths. So sometimes in the older grades, you might even get students writing about a picture that they've enjoyed. This is not at all the focus in my catered to classes. In fact, in kindergarten, I don't jump into visual literacy except to talk about double page spreads. So when I say that I'm working with picture books, I'm really referring to years 1 and 2. But I've just put this little piece of writing here for any stage 3 teachers who happen to be looking, because it's a dear little formula that can assist you with structuring writing about images. So I hope that's helpful. This is some work done by a year 5 group at a school. It was done with a teacher who'd been at my workshop, my visual literacy workshop, and she sent me this work, which is lovely. So I'm talking about just lovely discussions, but these discussions are kind of based on Kress and Van Leeuwen's Grammar of Visual Design. So it's not at all that you have to know this in depth, but just to be aware that when you look at any image, the first thing you want the kids to think about is what is happening here. And then you are interested in what stands out to them, and you're very interested in how the image makes them feel. And they are the 3 aspects of the image that Kress and Van Leeuwen discuss. So, you know, have a really good look at that online, because it's a beautiful grammar of visual design, but it's beyond today's purpose. All right, so then sometimes just for particular images where you feel as though as a reader you're right inside a room with the characters, or sometimes if you feel as if you've just momentarily become the main character, then I actually ask the question, where are you in this image, or who are you now? But these 2 questions are only for those moments when the illustrator has pulled a beautiful trick and you're kind of in the image as the reader. So the first way that you can introduce visual literacy techniques, and this is one of the ways I do it, this is my most recent method, is that I pick up a favorite picture book that I love, and I decide which illustrators' techniques are strongly featured. I'm kind of trying to look at the illustrator's signature style. So I'm aware of those techniques that I'm going to be drawing upon before I do the read with the kids. So basically, the first read of any picture book is just a glorious read for enjoyment. But then I go back after we've done the first read and I say, do you know what? I want to teach you about 3 things that this illustrator is actually doing. And I actually teach the technique embedded on 1 or 2 pages. And because it's a signature style, we're then going to be able to go through together the other pages in the picture book, and we're going to be able to pick out the way in which that illustrator continues to use those techniques across the whole picture book. So that's my first method for introducing visual literacy techniques. So for example, we might be going to have fun with double page spreads. We might be going to think about close-ups of main characters, and we might be going to have a little look at OTS and what over the shoulder really does. So that's very embedded, and I've got a picture book in mind, but I certainly do have a number of follow-up picture books that are going to consolidate those visual literacy techniques over the next few lessons. Now, something that's really good is that I don't really just explain the technique. I sort of, in the second half of each sentence, I sort of explain why the illustrator has done it. And above everything, I say to the kids, I'm teaching you these illustrators' tricks so that you can use these techniques in your own artwork. We're not just going to enjoy them in this book, but we're actually really going to set you free so that you can use these techniques in your own drawings. We want to see you using them. So I might say, okay, so this is a close-up. And then I'll say, now it's used because when we see a close-up, we really connect with the main character and we really connect with how they're feeling. So, you know, I might say that an over-the-shoulder shot really gets us to be interested in what's going to happen next to that main character. We're going to follow them, and we're really going to see what's going to happen. And you can also connect it with the types of video games that the kids play as well, because sometimes, you know, they are doing ones where they're doing third-person player and sometimes they're doing first-person point of view player. So you can connect it to their video games. So really make sure that when you're explaining a visual literacy technique, that you're also in the second half of your sentence, you're going, this is a blah, 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 and the illustrator does it because, and then that will make the students really aware of why they might use it. So let's take a little pause for a moment and have a look at a picture book that you've actually brought along with you to this session. Have a think about which illustrated techniques really feature strongly. What is the signature style of your illustrator? And select 3 techniques. And when we stop our pause, we will have a group discussion about the techniques that you're going to showcase to students. Now, there's a second way that you can introduce visual literacy techniques. You can decide on a suite of common illustrated techniques, and you can explicitly teach these. You can either show the students a slideshow of these techniques. I mean, speaking bluntly, I've got a little whiteboard on wheels in the library, and I often draw up a grid, and the kids have got the same grid that they're drawing into as a piece of paper. And as I'm doing the visual literacy technique, they're actually drawing it at the same time. So they're turning it into a drawing and just consolidating it. So if you use this method, then you have got the techniques sort of in the students' minds before you actually turn to a picture book or before you turn to a video to see them in action. So this is kind of, I suppose you'd say this is the kind of explicit teaching method. I've loved this in the past, and I now have multiple classes at the same time in the library with their beautiful teachers. So I'm not always going to do drawings nowadays. This is sort of the thing that I could do when I had one class at a time. But anyway, this is a really cool method, is to teach explicitly. So I've just magnified the grid that I used to use for the things that I thought were really important to start getting our heads around visual literacy techniques. So I would draw a demand, and I would make it so important that the main character's face is big on the page. It's not interesting to have a demand where there's just a character in the background that's staring straight at the reader. It's got to be really clear that the character is looking straight out at the reader. Their eyes have to be looking straight ahead. They can't be looking in either direction. So that's really fun, getting the kids to do that and double checking with each other as to whether their demand is going straight ahead. So when I teach about vectors, honestly, I often get the kids to just draw a path going across this top right of the grid diagonally, because I want them to get the idea that vectors don't have to just be straight lines. They can also be, excuse me, curving lines. And we can stop and do a bit of work with images in our picture books about where kids come into an image and how they follow the vectors in the image. But don't waste your time doing this on images that don't have clear vectors pulling your eye, because it's only interesting if the illustrator has an intention to draw your eye in a certain direction. So again, salient, you may never use the word salient with students. You might just say what stands out in this image. That might be what you would use, whereas I do tend to use the terms demand and vectors with kids. Okay, so I like to talk about the long shot as being something that is very commonly used at the beginning of a picture book or a video. Of course, every illustrator does what they want, which is glorious. So it might be that we just start off by actually meeting a main character, but oftentimes we will see the setting that the character is actually in. So then I like to do the OTS, because students, the biggest common mistake that students make when they do the OTS is they can't quite believe that you have to draw the back of someone's head and their shoulders. They will be very tempted to draw a face for you, and it's really important. That's why we do it as we go. We do a demand, we all look at it, and so on, because we do the OTS because we have to have the back of their hair and their shoulders, but there has to be enough space in the image that we can see, looking from behind them, all the good things that they see. So we can't take up the whole of this grid just there. The OTS character has to be down kind of low enough so that we can see what that character is seeing. So I talk about side angle as often being quite neutral. It isn't always neutral. I mean, sometimes when characters are in side angle, they're kind of chasing something, but a lot of the time side angle can be quite neutral and just moving events forward, whereas OTS shots can often be a little bit exciting and full of suspense. So when we're looking at a low angle shot, we, the reader, are down low. And that's the really important definition. We, the reader, are down low. And a high angle shot, of course, is when we are looking down. We're up high. Some people, you know, call these shots aerial views or bird's eye view if it's really of a big landscape. But it can just be high angle if you're relatively close to something or close to a character. So once you've actually done all those drawings, you can then, of course, just start looking at picture books and jump in and look at the illustrators' techniques. But I have found that it's really fun to consolidate by looking at the video on YouTube of Tuesday, because it's got so few words in it. So I like to head there in lesson number 2, and I like to watch the video once for enjoyment, so they can just really, just relish it. And then I like to go back for a second go, and I like to freeze frame certain shots and get the students to draw these on their storyboards, just so that they can sort of understand how David Wiesner might have planned his key shots in this video. Actually, it's taken from a gorgeous book by David Wiesner. So that's really enjoyable. And then it gets them to sort of practice doing that gorgeous long shot that established the setting, the establishing shot at the beginning in the swamp, and then the demand where the frog just opens his eyes. It's interesting with OTS because this video gives us an opportunity to see the frogs with a lot of OTS. So you can say it's a really signature style of David Wiesner's, but it's good too because the OTS is kind of pretty angled. So it gives me an opportunity to say to the kids, this is not just a straight behind the back shot. The frogs are actually angled. It's not a side angle shot, but OTS can be quite angled. So basically, it's a fantastic and enjoyable way to consolidate some of the visual literacy techniques that they did in that grid lesson before. And this one works really well for years 1 and 2 because drawing frogs isn't too nerve-wracking. Now you might want to follow up lesson 1 which was the grid one. If you were teaching years 3 and 4, you might like to look at the gorgeous video about the Tin Forest, which is an adaptation actually of the picture book. So it's not exactly the same. So it's also a really fun compare and contrast sort of set of lessons as well about what's different between the video and the picture book. Anyway, so basically this is another opportunity to watch it through for enjoyment and then consolidate their understanding of shot types and so on by freeze framing on the second view. So beautiful, beautiful video, and a lovely lesson too if you like to do this method. Now, some people get really interested after doing this storyboarding of those 2 videos. Some people like to go into a little bit more storyboarding. So, you might just head straight into reading picture books together and enjoying them. But if you're really having a good time with storyboarding, you might choose to do in year 1 and 2, you might choose to have a worm character and do a very simple storyboard so that the kids can actually just practice a little bit more about what this all looks like if you were planning your own picture book. So in the establishing shot, basically you talk together about where the setting is going to be. If you've got kids who are just really adventurous and don't want to be straitjacketed, just let them all choose their own settings. But I've found that people quite enjoy a bit of a brainstorm about what the setting might be. And then we meet our worm character looking at us, big face on the screen, and the worm body behind, connecting with us in a close-up shot. So we get to meet the main character worm. And then we basically are up high and we are over the shoulder and we're watching the worm as it moves away. And then the next one, we have a side angle, which is sort of neutral, and we only see one eye of the worm. And then because close-ups often show us how a character is feeling when something goes wrong, we can have the worm having either a very sad, worried, or angry face. and then we can do another over the shoulder shot. So it's just a bit of fun if it's the way you want to go. If it's not the way you want to go, just relax and ignore the whole thing. Similarly then, if you've got kids in years 3 and 4, they might really enjoy to move beyond the simple worm one and actually think about some of the sorts of shots and pictures that you might choose in a kind of simple quest picture book. And this quest that I came up here with the kids was around a sort of main character who had special powers and was actually setting out to sort of find a magical object. And along the way, this main character actually meets up with a horrible sort of grotty something or another, which is the complication. And then we can see that we're looking over the shoulder of our main character and seeing what they do to fix the situation. And they basically cast a spell. And the next happy bit is that they've actually find their quest object. And we see that over the shoulder. And then the story sort of ends triumphantly with the main character looking at the reader and saying, with a very happy expression, understanding what they're going to be able to do with that quest object. So here's a little example that Jacob did. Basically, he just sort of laid out what happened when he was going along and he met up with a big wolf, and he was able actually to blow the big wolf away, and he turned it blue. And as you can see there, he didn't want to do OTS. He basically, did a kind of a front angle there. So there you go. But he did revert to OTS when he found the magic sword that he needed. And so basically he plans to go absolutely berserk with the magic sword and do a lot of destroying of other characters. So just take a moment to take a note of some videos that you know of that you could use as a storyboarding stimulus. I'm thinking of one that could be quite lovely called The Present, about the little boy who gets the pet from his mum. It's very moving. So, but maybe it's a bit too emotionally loaded. Maybe it just needs to be enjoyed for what it is. Anyway, note down a video or two that could be a good storyboarding stimulus, and we'll have a discussion. So this is more for stage 3 learners, but it can easily go down to lower learners if people have their own devices. So basically, as well as doing drawings to show that we understand visual literacy techniques, it's really enjoyable to get students to take photos to demonstrate their grasp. So basically, if you've got iPads happening or anything at all that basically can take a photo, you can put a list up and go, okay, people, by the end of this session, I want to have from you a demand. They work in pairs, obviously. I want a long shot. I'd like a high angle shot. I'd like a low angle shot, something like that. So you put up your requests, and send students away, and then they come on back, and you can basically critique a few students' work because they get terribly restless if you look at too many. But you can have a look and see whether they've actually understood what is an over the shoulder shot, for example. They've got to get behind their partner's shoulder and head and still show quite a bit of what's in the room. So that's very enjoyable. But if you want to get a little bit more adventurous, you can also set them some photography tasks that are a little bit more challenging. And I made up a website in collaboration actually with Lua's Gallery in Penrith. And they had a gorgeous photographic exhibition by teenagers called Snapshot. It was beautiful. I was really inspired by it. And so they kindly allowed me to sort of feature a few of their photographs on a website, and then have a set of tasks that I could then do with primary school students, that sort of just used them as inspiration, and sort of got the kids in year 5 and 6 making some photographs, and then basically creating an exhibition. So these are the tasks that I put on the website. So, you know, look down just means do some high angle shots. Up close, obviously they're close-ups. Look up means low angle shots. You know, portrait and face shots can include demands. They don't have to. So basically, this was the way in which I sort of reclassified some of the photographs from the exhibition, just to make it perhaps a little bit more accessible for primary school students. So here's just an example of some photographs that we took in 5K at one of my schools that I was working at. Just the students going out onto the playground. And here are 3 of the look down shots. Here are 3 of the look up shots that students came up with. So that's just another way that you can take visual literacy a little bit further if you want to extend your teaching into curating a photographic exhibition. Anyway, let's head on back to the typical PRC lesson formats. So what are the 2 things that we might do now that we've got a bit of a grasp of some of the illustrators' techniques? So one typical thing we can do is we can enjoy a book together, and on the second read through, we can have a flip through, and we can sort of notice some of the things that that illustrator really loves to do. And we can actually record those illustrators' techniques. So for example, here with Gecko's Echo, we can see that the illustrator loves double page spreads. There's a massive thought cloud picture. We've got a nice example of a low and high angle shot there. We've got a sort of interesting use of a circle frame. So basically, there's a number of things there that the illustrator's done. I also have another focus on some occasions in which I don't just note down the illustrator's techniques. I sometimes also note down some things that the author's getting up to. But anyway, that's what, you know, that's optional for you. Anyway, Room on the Broom, interesting really, because it's got no double page spreads, which is really fascinating. Heaps of side angle, and some beautiful curvy frames. I really enjoyed making up the word scenes here, actually, because basically Axel Scheffler here has all these gorgeous little scenarios which aren't strictly framed, but they are onto white backgrounds, and I decided to call them scenes because they're really quite luscious. Now the fun thing is that we can then take this a bit further with our option number 2, because option number 1, of course, is just, you know, read and record the illustrator style, leave it at that. We don't have enough time to do artwork. But if you do actually have time to do artwork, then that's what can be the follow-up activity after the story. So for example, after Gecko's Echo, you might draw your own animal and its enormous thought cloud. It's kind of like a homage piece in response to the illustrator's technique. Or you might decide that you want to get them doing their own OTS. Or for example, after Room on the Broom, you might decide that the thing that's screaming out is to get the kids to have fun and draw their own dragon or monster. So you sort of setting tasks that incorporate some of the fun things that the illustrator did in their story. So, for example, here, after reading those two books, we can see that here's a thought cloud that, in fact, there's a few thought clouds here featuring characters, actually. So you can see that our characters are thinking of other characters. And then we've got an OTS one there. And then we've also got some examples of drawing our own monsters. So that's the kind of thing I mean when I say that you've got that second option where you can actually do some drawing and not just stop at the recording, or actually skip the recording of the style really and do the drawing instead. So just to conclude this sort of slideshow, and then we'll have another discussion. So what has been one illustrator's technique that you have learned about today that you might teach more about when you respond to a picture book from now on? So please make a note of that. Please have a think about whether you would prefer to introduce visual literacy techniques via a picture book explanation of those techniques, or whether you think you'd like to actually kick off with an explicit lesson and then some storyboarding follow-ups. Which do you think appeals most? And which do you think you'll use most? Just ending up discussing the illustrator's style, or perhaps jumping into some drawing and photography, or perhaps a mixture. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but I will just remind you that on the first slide of the whole PowerPoint, I've put a URL from which you can download many teaching notes that relate to PRC picture books. So please enjoy downloading those teaching notes, because they'll save you a lot of time in preparing for those stories.